Welcome to One Word Stories, today episode 13. And my guest today is Chris Baldwin. Chris is a performance director, curator, and also writer. And many projects he is in charge of are involving the citizens. So he is the citizen-centered dramaturgy expert and actually a designer of wonderful events also for cultural capitals of Europe. And this is actually how we met. 2016, Wrocław in Western Poland was one of these capitals. And I had the pleasure to meet you, Chris, back then. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Joanna. It's lovely to see you again. And
Yes.
thank you for your lovely.
I'm thrilled that you are here, that you have joined, because I'm sure uh, we can get lots of inspirations from your experience, also from your passion for theater, and also activating people to get involved in huge cultural projects. I still remember one of your projects actually, the bridges.
Mhm.
And I was so fascinated because, especially in the intercultural field, when we think about bridges, we immediately talk about bridging cultures, bridging people from different cultures, enhancing understanding. And this is actually the question, how can we enhance understanding with such huge narrative projects?
Well, I suppose that size isn't everything. I think if I might start off with that statement, I think probably what we have to do in as cultural practitioners, and I know you do it, Joe. I know I've seen your work, is that you have to create the circumstances in under which we citizens, communities, whatever you want to describe the collective as, uh, fancy meeting the other,
Mm,
become somehow enchanted by the idea of meeting someone or sharing something with someone who could be different to you. Because I think probably as has become more clear in my own head over the last couple of years, actually, from some work I've been doing with in the field of ecology and sustainability. One Australian psychologist is very clear about the fact that when we're in danger as a human species, when we feel threatened, we look for reassuring voices. We look for people who will reconfirm our views of the world. So we look to family, we look to trusted members of the community. And the result of that is that we can often have views of our world which are reinforced rather than questioned. Well, the trick of our work as cultural practitioners, I think, is to find the mechanism, find the beauty, find the seduction, which allows people to step out of those certainties, because they're not certainties, they're actually often traps. That's what I love to do. I love to do it with people who I encounter and work with, and I love to do it to myself, of course. I'm not exceptionalizing the process and saying this is good for you. What I'm saying is this is the most joyous thing I've ever discovered in my own life, encountering things that are not like me. It does everything from decenter your power to make you realize that perhaps what you have to offer is the very essence of yourself, because that's what's unique. So we can do a two-way journey here, a two-way street. But that's the essence, encountering the other. And then I suppose in terms of, as you mentioned, scaling up or big events, that's kind of perhaps simply been opportunity or inquisitiveness from my part. thankfully, I got a job as a director working with children, for children, with adult actors, but working for children. And I spent 7 fantastic years doing that. So I don't think I do anything different now. I might have worked with 10 children. Now I work with 50,000 adults or audiences that are so big, I'm never going to know everybody's names like I did before. But it's the same. It's the same instinct. Bring people together to experience the other in a joyful way.
Yeah, yeah. When you are talking about this encountering the other and also the danger of sticking to people who are like-minded, it doesn't only refer to our surroundings, it also refers to social media, where we are part of this dynamics and conversations with people who are more or less like us, and we are in kind of a bubble. Yeah. So when we really want to, also practice, so to say, this intercultural communication exchange, also allowing different voices, especially right now where traveling is really, really tricky during the pandemics. What are your best ideas, best inspirations, how we can stay in touch with the world despite staying in one room, one place?
Well, this lockdown, I live in Bulgaria, in the southeast of Bulgaria, in a city called Plovdiv. And we have two borders that are quite close. The Greek border is about an hour and a little bit more. And the Turkish border is probably 2.5 hours. And this region is intercultural in the deepest sense. Borders are relatively modern inventions. Until the late 19th century, this area was part of the Ottoman Empire, and before that, in ancient history, part of Thrace. And you only need to leave Plovdiv, this city, 15 minutes by car or less, and you start to drive through villages which are noticeable by the fact that they have mosques and not churches. So there's a large Turkish or Turkish speaking population, minority population. So this idea that you have to travel very far to encounter peoples and traditions and ideas and religions and is different from ours, is in this area in particular. But I also lived for 20 years in Southampton in the south of England, where my every neighbor was Pakistani or Punjabi or Sileti, and then later Polish. The Siletis moved out, the Poles moved in. You don't have to go very far these days to encounter, thankfully, people who are different to you. And of course, ethnicity isn't everything. Even today, we have difference in through gender representation, sexualities, etc., etc. So the other is always both within us and in our families. So I don't have to, and I would recommend to everyone, don't think you have to travel far to find the intriguing and interesting. Even if you can't go very far, this extraordinary technology that we all have to hand more or less these days will lead us very quickly to the other. As you say, there can be a lot of aggression and violence when we step outside of our bubble. So that needs careful managing. But then also at the same time, you only need to look back one step into the history of your own community, into your own place. And I would be flabbergasted, to use an old English word, if you didn't discover that your place in your town was deeply intercultural or had the presence of others who are no longer here. So interculturality is around us, both in the past, the present, and the future, not just on the other side of a border.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Yes, I'm really grateful for your comment regarding the borders because, especially, when I think of borders right now during the COVID time, Of course, we don't only refer to this inter-country situation, borders are sometimes closed again and so on and so forth, but also the mental borders. And this is what you also address, that it's much more about really this mental borders and our perception that we always think that we need to go somewhere to exotic places to really meet people from other cultures and neglecting the possibilities we've got around the corner. And another issue you have just emphasized is, of course, this research on the places where we are based. So again, when I think of Wrocław, where we met, this was also, this possibility you offered with your huge performances to make the history of this city, of this region really tangible so that people could refer not only to Wrocław, so the Polish identity of this place, but also to Breslau, the German one, Bratislavia, still from this Czech time, and also Habsburger monarchy, and so on and so forth. So this is also, this multicultural identity, not only we refer to when we talk about people, but also about places.
Well, Joanne, this is really an incredibly interesting subject that you've raised here about the identity of Wrocław, especially if I might be slightly provocative in the present political condition in Poland, because it seems to me that what happened in 2016, particularly highlighted in the work that I directed, but there was many other projects, to be honest, over 3 or 4 thousand projects that happened in that period. Many of them shared similar ethical starting points, which was the following. When you start to attempt to impose a monolithic identity on a place, you start by creating an act of imaginative violence. You have to go through a process which, whether it was your intention or not, ends up excluding and silencing the other voice. And I suppose you've mentioned on a couple of occasions the size of the shows that I do or the events that I do. Well, if I would to say to you, I have very little to do with them by the time they get to that point where they're shared by audiences. And the reason is the following. What I do in the year or two running up to those events is I listen obsessively and I repeat back, in fact, rather like a therapist does, the key messages that potential participants or potential artists or citizens are trusting me with. And then I will go on a journey with them, an aesthetic journey, a cultural journey, not so much a therapeutic journey, where I will help them, enable them, encourage them, facilitate them sharing that story with a wider group of people. Now, I'm not actually, I am deeply politically and morally committed to them finding their voice and telling their story. But I'm also praying in the back of my head that there will be counter narratives, contradictory stories, other ways of understanding the world, which, if I apply my desire and ability to listen carefully, will also emerge. So in the end, you have, for example, the project you mentioned, Bridges, Mosty in Polish, where there were 27 bridges, I think, 27 bridges, all animated in the same day after a process that had taken 2 years. 27 different events happening in 27 different places at the same time, all micromanaged by people who needed to tell their story. Some of them were orchestral pieces, some of them were live art events, others were children's events, and the audio could circulate in whichever order they wished and encounter stories that they were not expecting to encounter. One particular project was run by a group of Ukrainian refugees, some of whom had just arrived in Wrocław, others who had spent many years there. And that project gave, I thought, was fascinating and terribly important, because it actually reflected back to a certain Wrocławian audience, their own experience, but 50, 60, 70 years later. In other words, it's obvious that almost every Pole living in Wrocław arrived from somewhere else. And now we have a political narrative that wishes to totally and utterly deny that truth and say Wrocław was always Polish.
Mm.
So to break down that, the only thing I can do is bring in and create space for other counter narratives, which hopefully create a debate. So that's where my kind of starting point is, in not allowing dominant narratives to become the dominant narrative, but
Mm.
to always look for justifiable contradictions, valid other points of view, stories and experiences of people that they need to tell.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I also have to think immediately about one aspect you have emphasized, namely story listening, that it takes such a huge part of preparation of the events, so that you really listen attentively to all the stories. As you have just said, you pray that there are also counter stories and not only the dominant stories, so that there is a balance of stories. What is the role of story listening in going beyond the borders? What is your experience? Also breaking, so to say,
Um,
with different stereotypes and with this invisible borders.
there is a very interesting psychologist called Loeb who worked with survivors of the Holocaust. Uh, and he would often talk about the disembodied experience that people who had been through such trauma were in a place where they could not speak any longer. They had been silenced, and that his job often was just to simply listen and acknowledge that he was listening, and acknowledge that a truth was emerging that he would listen to and take seriously. As I said before, cultural practice, storytelling, our work is not therapy, but it has therapeutic elements insofar that it can be very closely aligned to social therapies and collective therapies. So I was very interested as a result of Wrocław in particular, but you may recall I lived in Spain for 20 years and also worked for many years in the collapsing GDR. So from 1989, just on that cusp for about 9 years. And I was always fascinated by how social processes, uh, while shared, often remain unacknowledged as shared experiences. And that's the place where the radical right, forgive me for being political again, move in, because they know that people share experiences, and have been willing in recent years to tell the story to try and get people to follow them. A story that's false, a story of greatness, of make America great again, etc., etc. These are stories that don't help, but they are stories that tap into collective trauma. So I'm really very, very interested in how culture, and we have to get much, much more agile at it, how culture can serve as a buffer, because a culture can create the space in which all those contradictions, all that messiness, all that need to listen can occur and still create a result. And that result has to be story, because it's only through story do we understand our experience. We're human beings. We live and experience the world through action, not through contemplation, through action.
Exactly. It's
And,
about
and
meaning making.
stories are
Yeah.
exactly. And stories are fascinating because Predominantly, they describe action.
Hmm. Yeah.
The novel might not, but stories and theatre and plays do.
Hmm. Yeah. So, Chris, you have also curated many, many other projects. You were actually also involved in the project of the European Capital of Culture in Galway, in Ireland, and
Mhm.
also a fascinating event in Malta. And what actually happened, both events 2020 were, of course, more curated by COVID than by you.
Ah, that's an interesting way of describing it. You're quite right. You're quite right. To talk about Galway first, I spent a year working in Galway until 2018. So I wasn't there for the preparation. I was there for the preparation period, but not for the delivery period. And my heart went out to my colleagues there because they had not only had a very difficult time with the opening due to absolutely horrific weather conditions that kicked in across Galway Bay the weekend of their opening, but then within weeks, COVID raised its ugly head, and it was already, just the very beginning of a year that was packed with incredible experiences and events. And sadly, many of them had to, first of all, be postponed, some later cancelled. And but to be honest, an awful lot of them moved online or became COVID friendly. In other words, audiences had to kind of respect the new regulations. But Ireland has been through a torrid period, and it really cut through their European capital of culture. Malta was a very interesting experience for me because my work in Malta began in 2019. By I was really interested in again, I was asked to direct a big event. The folks in Malta, in Valletta, were incredibly generous and said, what would you like to do? We have this harbor, we have this event, we have this budget, but we need content. We need to form it and create it, and they gave me some kind of parameters, which were always good to hear. One was, there's an audience, but that audience are also participants. They're people. This is made for them, and could it include them? Well, this is interesting because I started off by I'm getting older. My hands are hurting. There's a bit of arthritis in my hands. And this has kind of sparked off a few memories in my head about my mother, but particularly my father's hands, who was a carpenter. And I know that his life became a bit more awkward as he got older because he couldn't manage his tools in the same way. And there I am, in my late 50s, thinking, now I understand what he was on about when I was a kid. And I thought, oh, this is interesting because this is nothing new. It's new to me, but it's almost the oldest condition that human beings have experienced from the beginning of time, when we were hitting rocks together to make chips. I mean, when we got to 35, we were saying, my hands hurt, I can't do this anymore. So, it's been around for us a long time. So I thought, okay, let's ask people in Valletta, how's your hands? How have you built this city with your hands? How do hands help you do your work? And probably by coincidence, and I do believe it was coincidence, although I don't really believe in coincidence. The main 6 or 7 interviewees we asked were men. They were artisans or laborers or engineers or metal makers, bakers, and they had stories to tell. I can assure you, they told me incredible stories in Maltese. So we used these stories. We created a dramaturgy out of these recorded stories of these, in the end, 6 interviews of these men. And I worked with a Maltese composer, Andrew Alamango, and a Maltese British visual artist, Charlie Couchy, fantastic woman. And first of all, Andrew and I created a 45-minute piece. He wrote the music, and we inserted the recorded sounds of these men speaking into that. And then Charlie created a 45-minute animation using drawn imagery and archival imagery and invented imagery to do with hands. So we had everything digitalized, and it was all to be projected onto moving sailing boats, 60 sailing boats in the harbor. So by total luck, as the lockdown kicked in, we had everything recorded. And Charlie was working at her desk in Valletta with her big computers, and Andrew was working at his computers and instruments in Gozo, and I was here in Plovdiv, and we would talk every day, and we gradually built the show so that we needed, in the end, 10 days in situ, myself with a technical team, and of course 120 sailors with 60 boats, and they could get the show, we could get the show on that way. But I learned a lesson, which is, or sorry, I learned a lesson that I can apply forwards, which is, I don't think COVID's going to go away. It may reduce, but we're going to have to be ready for the word in Spanish is brote, and I never remember it in English, outbursts,
Mhm.
other outbursts of COVID in the future, or something similar. So I think probably what we have to do now as cultural practitioners, storytellers, and people interested in working with communities is to work always on two lines, two parallel lines. One, so that the intimacy of our projects can be maintained wherever humanly possible, and that should always be prioritized. But secondly, because most of our money, let's be honest, comes from public resources, or NGO resources, or other resources that are somehow in the public domain, that work and that conversation can be maintained in parallel ways should the needs be. And so it's not exactly plan A and plan B, it's plan A and B at the same time.
Mm.
That's what I learned from Malta, and I'm sure thousands of us around Europe and the world are learning the same lesson at the moment. We can't have a plan A and a plan B. We need plan A, B, and C all running at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So this is one more idea how we should also, perceive this change in perceiving borders. Yeah. So
Yes,
so
yes,
far we always thought in this polarization, yes, modes, either face to face or virtual. Yeah.
yeah,
Either live event or TV show. Right now, as you are just saying, we need to really re-narrate many ideas how we actually create these borders, and to get rid of this very fixed
yeah,
definitions.
yeah. Let me say two things in response to that. Firstly, we Europeans, on a whole, are hugely and totally privileged.
Hmm.
We can do that.
Yeah.
What we probably haven't done is had the motivation or the imagination to realize it might be necessary. But all of the technologies there, and actually, in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, it's only relatively a little bit more money. I
Yeah.
mean, I have not bought any new equipment to survive almost for 2 years working in an utterly different way.
Hmm.
And I don't know many people who have, to be honest. That's the first thing. And the second thing, again, let me be honest here, as an ecologist activist, I'm over the moon. I'm overjoyed to see that my personal footprint through hundreds of airports and airport time and aeroplanes has been radically reduced over the last 12 months. And I will be deeply anxious about returning to anything like it was before in order to cross a border of space or a border of time or what have you. Having said all of that, I want to hug the people I work with. I want to drink coffee. I want to see my grandson. I want to go and see places I haven't seen before, as I mentioned to you before. All of those things are inevitably, being missed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this brings me to another question, the very important question. What is actually the one word that is significant for you to thrive during this uncertain time?
I think it's love. I mean, if I didn't have love centrally in my life, I know on a minute by minute basis that I'm loved by somebody, and that person, my wife, uh, welcomes and receives my love. So we cherish each other, we nurture each other, and for all of the hostility that's around, the biological hostility, and let's be honest, it is hostile. I mean, we've lost very close and good friends in the last 12 months as a result of this COVID-19. People who I didn't expected to say goodbye to, I didn't have chance to say goodbye to. Me, I was their friends on most occasions. We're talking about family, their families not being able to say goodbye. Absolute tragedy in every direction. In the UK, my home country, 100, more than 150,000 people have died of this. So love is what has allowed a path through for me. By the way, love not just in the intimate way between partners, but literally love for life. I mean, I'm so fascinated by life that where it's taken different turns, and this turn has both been restricting but freeing. You know, how could you not get up in most mornings, at least not every morning, and just look for what the wonderful possibilities there are. And last time in the last lockdown last year, we ended up standing outside our house. We have a little terrace here, and I managed to get some wood, and I got my dad's tools out, the carpenter, and I taught our 15-year-old daughter how to make joints, and we made some wooden frames for doors that we had found in the streets during the lockdown. So, you know, who would have done that had there not been a lockdown?
Yes,
That's the
definitely,
first word, and the other word
definitely.
is age. I think I've learned to be patient, and I've learned to know. I know things, as Joni Mitchell said, not every, things will pass, and there's a new reality to discover. So age, I don't think I would have been as mentally capable of managing this, to be honest, 30 years ago, or if I had had children who were 2 years old in the same house as me, who desperately need to get out, or if I had been financially precarious or in debt and had people making life as miserable as I know they can when you owe money. So I think age for me has been a huge godsend on this occasion, but I have huge empathy and huge concern for people who are younger and facing precarity in so many different ways in this time.
Mhm. Yeah. I can relate to it a lot because, especially right now when we are, so to say, in the more or less second, third lockdown, it's getting heavier and heavier. So, yes, you are just addressing the issue with age. And of course, there is no better or worse age for for this situation. I guess it's a lot about attitude, and when you address the word love, I had to smile immediately because yes, there are unfortunately these moments when we still can hug and laugh together and just enjoy despite the circumstances. And I guess it's not so much about the environment, about the surroundings, but really about our own attitude. So we need to control our thoughts even much, much stronger than before, so that we also notice these moments of beauty. Then the spring is beginning right now, that everything is blossoming, and that we've got so many tiny reasons also to enjoy. And yes.
Yes, in the last lockdown or the first one, as you say, what are we on now? The third. Another one started today in Bulgaria. It's not as vicious as the first one. So certain things are open and you are allowed to walk or go to work actually. But the main institutions have closed and the main shopping centers. But in the first lockdown, which was, very, very strict here, we rediscovered the city at night. You were allowed for a 40-minute walk and we took absolute advantage of it. And we walked the empty streets. We found the Turkish quarters. We found the different normally hidden palimpsests of the city. We listened to the silence and the birds that are normally obliterated by the noise of the traffic. So yes, you have to remain innocent, cherish your innocence, and cherish a degree of naivety to rediscover, even in times of austerity.
Yeah, thank you. And with this magic word to rediscover, I wish you, you know, that you also can rediscover still many, many stories from the past to re-narrate them, to rediscover many places. Everything is ahead of us.
Thank you.
And also, of course, again, wonderful projects, not only with your Teatro de Creación, but also in general in other contexts that you can blossom and flourish. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna.